Hey everybody, Stefan Molyneux from Freedomain. Hope you're doing well. So I posted something on Twitter the other day, which was a study that was put out, which through a variety of mechanisms, in particular believing or based upon the assumption that low cloud cover had not been sufficiently taken into account by the IPCC in the calculation of anthropogenic causes of climate change, they had adjusted the calculation so that the human contribution to climate change was 0.01 degrees Celsius. Now, I am not a scientist, I'm not a mathematician. I thought it was an interesting approach, an interesting argument. And of course, I didn't claim that it was true, but it's important to get all sides of a debate. And I tend to bring up the least cited aspects of any particular conversation, which is why I don't post a lot of here's the proof for global warming, because that's kind of everywhere, right? But I think it's important to get counter narratives, which is what I do on a regular basis. Now, people get really, really angry and really, really upset about this stuff, about arguments that go against climate change. Now, I get that the argument is, well, it's a planet catastrophe and we're all going to die and all of that. And, okay, there's that aspect to it. Of course, in general, like there's an old saying in the stock market that the people who make money off the bear market make money off the people who've never been through a bear market before, like people who short stocks and so on. And I understand that too, because I'm old enough, of course, that this is probably my fourth or fifth imminent ecological planetary catastrophe that has been going on in my lifetime. So when I was a little kid, we were regularly told when I was growing up in England that the world was going to run out of oil, that the world was going to run out of coal, that the world was going to run out of food. I remember very, very clearly being told, and there being books all over the bookstore about how the world was going to run out of food. There would be worldwide famine by 1980, right? I remember people just talking about all of these imminent catastrophes. There was holes in the ozone layer. There was global cooling, there was global warming, there was now climate change as a whole. Now, maybe after these whole successive series of imminent catastrophes, and of course, nuclear war, which I know is not exactly environmental, but, would have environmental effects. Maybe after all of these catastrophes have turned out to be not true, in fact, quite the opposite in many ways, maybe the next one is true, right? It's certainly within the realm of possibility. But the one thing that always makes me kind of suspicious is when I was chief technical officer in a software company, we would have these big projects. And then after the projects, we would have what we'd call postmortems, right? So we'd go off-site for a day or two. We'd go over everything that happened in the project, what happened well, what happened badly, what could be improved, and so on. Because, there's nothing worse in life than making the same mistakes over and over and over again. It really feels like you're trapped in this revolving door of descending spiral boredom and frustration. And so you don't want to make the same mistakes again. The environmentalists who generate these stories of imminent disaster and doom and famine and starvation and disease and plague and pestilence and weather events and you name it, when they turn out to be wrong, there's not a big staring Hamlet style into the deep Yorick skulls of the mirror and figuring out what went wrong. What did we do wrong? What mistakes did we make? What did we overlook? What did we miss? No, they just scurry on to the next goddamn catastrophe with which they can eviscerate children of their joy of childhood. So this lack of circling back, this lack of postmortem, to me is a very, very strong indication that there's just a blur of the fingers magician con man that's going on to pick the pockets of the next and future generations based upon fear-mongering in the here and now, because they don't sit there and say, wow, we scared the living crap out of people. We ruined people's childhoods. We caused people to spiral into nihilism and to feel that there was no future. We caused Greta Thunberg to lose a huge amount of weight and be depressed and all of that. So, that was clearly very bad because we got it wrong. So let's put the mechanisms in place to make sure it never happens again. That never happens. It's run off to the next catastrophe. So I understand that people are kind of invested in this, like, boy, Steph, if you're wrong about having any skepticism about this stuff, boy, you're contributing to the demise of the planet. It's like, yeah, but you could say that about anything. That's Pascal's wager. You could say that about anything. So, but I want to sort of explain to people why there's such emotional investment in this topic of climate change and imminent catastrophe. So If you can convince people that the world is going to be irreversibly on the path to destruction in 10 years or 12 years, often 12 years, right? So cycle of politics time. If you can convince people that the world is going to end, which has been a favorite cult tactic since the dawn of time, then what happens is, well, first of all, they get wrapped up in this very big drama. And, you know, that kind of hysterical world-ending Armageddon Revelation-style drama does tend to displace the normal pursuits in life. It tends to make people feel that they're in some big, grand, apocalyptic action movie rather than the general sitcom of the everyday, which is where most of us find our sustenance, life, and love. So that the drama can get very, very addicting very, very quickly. But it's even more subtle and fundamental than that. If you can convince people, right, didn't they just take down the signs in some glacier park that said these glaciers will be gone by 2020? They just had to take those signs down because, lo and behold, the glaciers are still there. If you can get people to genuinely believe the world's going to end, those people make very deep, very foundational, and often irreversible life choices based upon that information. So when I was a child, I was drawn into a form of hedonistic nihilism because of all of these imminent predictions of disasters, because of the constant threat of nuclear war and the Kremlin-funded agitprop known as nuclear winter and so on. And there didn't seem to be much point studying for the math test, and there didn't seem to be much point deferring gratification because the world was going to end. And so if you fall into that, you make foundational life choices. Now, I managed through philosophy and through a lot of research to wrestle my way out of that nihilism and into a better, more humane, longer term, more positive frame of mind, which has been literally a lifesaver for me. But if you don't fight your way free of those smoky, eye-blinding tentacles of nihilistic propaganda coming out of the left, coming out of the environmental movement, then what happens is you end up making kind of irreversible life decisions based upon the imminent end of all things. And if you're wrong about that, if all things are not about to end, if the world is not on the slippery slope to a smoky death, then you have fracked up almost beyond human imagination. So, I mean, I remember some years ago having a very intense conversation with a woman who said, well, I'm not going to have kids because climate change and overpopulation and, you know, all of the usual high IQ decimating propaganda that comes out of the left. I mean, nobody's going to Nigeria or Somalia where the birth rates are 6, 7 plus kids a woman and doing all of that, right? It's all always in the left and always in the West and all that. And you usually aimed at sort of the hyper-conscience of the high IQ individuals. But she then, you know, and I talked to her about this, and I said, you know, here's the arguments against it. And also, you know, maybe your kid, because you care so much about these issues, maybe your child is going to be the one who figure out how to solve all these issues or solve some part of these issues. Like, there's no reason why that couldn't be the case, because you'll transmit your values to him. So then she ended up getting married, and now, unfortunately, she just can't have kids. It's too late. It's too late. And she's really struggling with this, right? Because if you've been lied to the point where you've not got your education, or you've got your education in something frivolous, or you've not dug in and got yourself a career, you've not deferred gratification to the point where you've become a high-quality person, maybe you've compromised your health, maybe you smoked or drank or take drugs or whatever, or maybe you've had a lot of promiscuity or whatever because you're like, hey, the world's going to end. Get your kicks in while you can. And then it turns out that this was all fabrication, that this was, if it does turn out to be the case, that it's a lie or a fabrication, then you've made irreversible and catastrophic life decisions based upon the cult mentality of imminent doom. World-spanning catastrophe. That is a very difficult thing to come to grips with. That you may have ruined your life because you were lied to by people given great credibility by the mainstream of society. I'm sorry if it turns out to be the case, but just because you've effed up doesn't mean the rest of us should be effed. So when I was about 14 or 15 years old, I found a copy in my English classroom of a book by Alexander Solzhenitsyn called A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, which detailed what it was like in a Soviet gulag, and that led me down a whole path of studying human evil, of studying mass murders, of studying genocide, of studying the Holocaust, and just trying to absorb and figure out and process the depth and breadth of human evil and the murderous impulse that seems to rear itself like some jugular striking hydra head repeatedly in human history. And Project Veritas has done some work here. The hashtag is exposed2020. I put links to all of this below. I'm not going to play the audio because it's kind of rough and you won't be able to hear it very well. But what I will do is I will read it to you. This is Exposed 2020 Part 1. Bernie 2020 field organizer states effing cities will burn if Trump wins re-election, calls for violence, mass murder of opposition, and reign of terror. Reign of terror, of course, a reference to the left in the French Revolution, who, when they got to power, or on their way to power, slaughtered priests, slaughtered nuns, slaughtered children, and invented the guillotine so that they could more efficiently mass murder the population. So this is Kyle Jurek, Iowa field organizer of the Sanders campaign, says, I'm ready to throw down now. The billionaire class, the effing media, pundits, walk into MSNBC studios, drag those MFers out by their hair and light them on fire in the streets. He suggests that liberal Democrats should be placed in gulags or be put to death. Liberals get the effing wall first. And this is, like I'm telling you, this is like when you play around with communism, when you play around with totalitarianism, you invite some significant devils into the world and you give them an enormous amount of power. And it's almost kind of like a death wish. This guy, remember, field organizer for the Sanders campaign says, well, I'll tell you what, in Cuba, what did they do to reactionaries? You want to fight against the revolution? You're going to die for it, MFer. Free speech has repercussions. There are consequences. You should expect a violent reaction, and you deserve a violent reaction. He considers, like, the world is on fire. This is an emergency situation, and you're hung up on vaginas. In other words, should Elizabeth Warren get the nomination because she's female? He has been paid at least $9,775 since starting in his official campaign role. And yeah, he says if Bernie doesn't get the nomination or it goes to a second round of the DNC convention, effing Milwaukee will burn. It'll start in Milwaukee, and when the police push back on that, then other cities will just effing. The cops are going to be the ones that are getting effing beaten in Milwaukee, he says. They're going to call up the National Guard for that. Shite, I promise you that. He says, I'm ready to throw down now. I don't want to wait and have to wait for effing DNC. The billionaire class, the effing media, pundits, walk into that MSNBC studios, drag those MFers out by their hair and light them on fire in the streets. And it's wild stuff. He supports Bernie Sanders, but is upset that Warren supporters equate Sanders to Warren. He says, yeah, like we're not on the same team, guys, you know. Like I know you guys like to say, hey, Warren's just like Bernie, but a woman. But guess what? We're not on the same team. And he complains about Bernie's judgment of character and complains about free speech. And he says the only thing that fascists understand is violence. So the only way you can confront them is with violence. And this is a field organizer for the Sanders campaign. This is part 2. Bernie 2020 field organizer Kyle Jurek. There are things that are more important than the rule of law in the United States. Declares that his views are shared by many others. Within the Sanders campaign, Secret Service have been notified of a POTUS assassination concern. Now, he says Stalin had a legitimate reason to use gulags, claiming gulags were, quote, better than what the CIA has told us they were. Try that with Treblinka or Auschwitz. And gulags, I mean, you've got to read, so it's grim reading, but essential reading if you want to understand the 20th century and the possible 21st century. The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn is grim, brutal stuff, but essential to understand just how ugly human nature can be when it is liberated from voluntarism and moral consequences. So he says, that he's participated in Antifa events, the people who shut down my speeches, reveals that, quote, a lot of them are probably on the Bernie campaign. And he said, so this is what he said. He said, there's a reason Joseph Stalin had gulags, right? And actually gulags are a lot better than what the CIA has told us they were. And then he complains about American prisons. Soviet Union didn't do that. And he says, yeah, you're not going to get Bernie to say gulags, but like I'm all aboard for gulags. Like I feel there needs to be re-education for a significant portion of our society. I mean, but running for president in the United States, you can't say anything like that, right? Putting them up against a wall. I mean, the alternative, instead of trying to like re-educate these people and put them back into society, the only other alternative is to effing, and then he makes a gesture and shooting noise. You know what I mean? So the Project Veritas Action journalists also asked him about his involvement with violent groups such as Antifa and what political ideologies he and his colleagues identify with. The journalist said, that's just crazy what that guy said. I mean, I know we have a lot of the communists, the Marxists on our side, but, and he says, yeah, I'm one of them. Yeah? Yeah. In fact, there's, that I know of, 1, 2, 3, 4 of the organizers in this office are leftists of some degree, further left than the Democratic Socialists. The degree varies, but many of the organizers are, actually, I didn't even count Justin. So Justin, me, Derek, Danielle, Jessica, we're all further left than the Democratic Socialists. And he says, I'm an anarcho-communist, so I'm as far to the left as you can possibly get. And he says, I mean, the whole basis of communism is like people and planet above property. Like we're here to preserve the planet, to preserve people, right? We don't want to have to, but if people are going to try and fight back against the revolution, so when you hear about like atrocities committed in Cuba by like Fidel and Che, like killing people, those people who were actively like, they were anti-revolution. They were fighting against the revolution. Like in any war, like you guys were in a war and you encounter people who are fighting against you, what do? Kill them. What did you do? Kill them. Right. Same thing holds true in a revolution. Right? Like you can't abide people actively working against your effing revolution. Like you can't give them a choice. Like, hey, you can join the revolution. You cannot be a bootlicker. You could sit idly by and allow it to happen. But if you're going to take up arms against the revolution, then you should expect a violent response. Right? Like it's effing natural. So then there's all this panic about global warming, I think, fighting for the survival of the human race. And of course, if you can get people to panic about these extremities, then the by any means necessary becomes entirely justifiable for them, right? And then he's looking to he's hoping to punch a Nazi, and he said, the journalist said, are there Antifa people here? He said, there are some here, a lot of them probably on the Bernie campaign, but there is a DSA, a Democratic Socialists of America, chapter here, so like some of the DSA folks we've been looking for an action to like participate in. Like in regard to immigration and ICE, we've been looking for something to pop off so we can effing pop right back off. One day I'll get the chance, he says. So that is the reality of the people who oppose me. And, those of us who are out here trying to stand between these wolves and the general population, it's a bit of a thankless job at times. It's a bit of a difficult job. And, of course, if you were to mirror this on the Trump side, everybody would be going crazy if there was somebody. This could conceivably be somewhat worse than saying that if you're famous and rich and powerful, women will let you grab them by the pussy. This could be considered somewhat more dangerous than that. And the media, who's not reporting on this, who's not exposing all of this kind of stuff, they are just consumed with a death wish because we'll all be up against the wall. Okay, some final thoughts. It is, of course, hard to fathom where such bottomless hatred and hostility comes from. I've done a series called The Bomb in the Brain, which goes through some of the data regarding the effects on adults of significantly traumatized childhoods. And I think it goes without saying that this fellow and others like him had very bad childhoods, and they, of course, are filled with a lot of anger at a society that failed to protect them, as it does fail to protect many children. But of course, as I've talked about peaceful parenting and tried to help families improve, there has been a lot of backlash against me, just as there has been after I released my very anti-communist documentary called Hong Kong Fight for Freedom. You can find that at fdrurl.com/Hong Kong. You can find it at freedomain.com. Just look at documentaries. Please check it out and share it. It's being quite hidden from view, unfortunately. So I wanted to leave you with a thought about all of this, because one of the things that's quite confusing in life is the basic reality that corporations are constantly telling you how dangerous corporations are. right? So corporations that run the media, corporations that run Hollywood and so on, that write children's books are constantly telling you how dangerous corporations are. It's really, really fascinating when you think about it. And I think the answer to that is this. Corporations like telling you how dangerous corporations are so that you will run to the government and demand that the government expand its powers to protect you from corporations. Corporations then use those expanded government powers to maximize their own profits, often at the expense of the general population and particularly of the poor. I think this helps crack the nut as to why you see so much anti-corporate propaganda coming from corporations. They get you scared, you run to the government, and then they have a red phone hotline to the government, which you don't have, and the government then does their will, generally, at your expense. Because corporations, I mean, they are legal fictions invented by the state to protect senior members of the corporation from personal liability for wrongdoing. But in the free market manifestation, they can't force you to do anything. They can advertise, they can influence. The car company can hire a bikini model to drape herself on the hood, but they can't force you to buy the car. The power to compel you rests on the state. And of course, if all you're worried about is corporations, you're missing the real enemy. Greatness should not be on a basketball court. Greatness should not be on a movie screen. Greatness should not be on a concert stage. Greatness should be something we can all participate in. It should not require extraordinary talent or great creativity or wonderful singing voice. It should be something that we can all participate in and enact and bring to life in our own worlds. Greatness is hard work. Greatness is virtue. Greatness is a commitment to peace and negotiation and honesty and honor. These are things that we can all participate in our own lives. We don't need to be recruited out of high school and have a 20-year, multi-hundred-million-dollar career in order to achieve greatness. And when we worship people rather than principles, we diminish ourselves. The more we make human beings into gods, the more we make ourselves into nothing. Because relative to these gods, we have almost no existence. Embodying principles elevates us. Worshipping people diminishes us to virtual invisibility. It makes us small, and it gets us off the hook from participating in the moral greatness that is the birthright of every human being. When we worship principles, we are empowered. When we worship people, we are diminished. This is the year. This is the year of make or break for liberty. This is where the fork in the road either goes up to the mountaintops of human freedom or down into a living hell that we saw all too often in the 20th century. Please commit yourself to freedom, commit yourself to action, commit yourself to supporting those you find the most powerful and vocal supporters of freedom. And please, please, if you can help me out, I am on bended knee and desperately need your help at freedomain.com/donate. That's freedomain.com/donate. I promise I will keep on going, but I really, really can't do it without you. freedomain.com/donate. Thank you. Let's go.
And thousands of Second Amendment advocates showed up in Richmond, Virginia today to support their right to keep and bear arms. And true to form, liberals in the media have labeled them all white supremacists.
There are new fears tied to a pro-gun rally that's scheduled in Virginia.
Governor Ralph Northam declaring a state of emergency after learning armed militias and hate groups plan to join the protest.
Monday's rally could be a repeat of what happened in Charlottesville in 2017.
Because apparently they're still too lazy to come up with a better argument. Now, then again, this is the same group of people who have trouble with the simple phrase, shall not be infringed. So really, what can you expect? Thousands of people descended upon the Virginia capital of Richmond Monday morning to protest Governor Ralph Blackface Northam
I darkened my face
and his fellow Democrats for their plans to launch an all-out assault on the Second Amendment. Among the bills they've promised to put forward are a 1 handgun per month purchase limit, universal background checks, and dangerous red flag laws that could strip people of their constitutional rights without due process. Democrats have also pledged to introduce an assault weapons ban, which, as anyone with even a modicum of basic gun knowledge knows, is a ban on all scary black boom boom guns that the left could not accurately define if you paid them, which unfortunately is exactly what is happening. Now, this so-called assault weapons ban would include AR-15s, the most popular sporting rifle in the country that is already owned by tens of thousands of Virginians. So that's what all of these folks showed up to protest. This all-out attack on their constitutional right to keep and bear arms. And of course, they got labeled as a bunch of neo-Nazis for their trouble, which frankly is incredibly assaulting to the black gun owners who showed up. Here are some.
This is a white supremacist event, and so, yeah, they're not going to, cover that there's black people here, but rally.
Racist here today, bro.
Yeah, this grandma drove from South Carolina.
I'm so mad my phone
I did it for white supremacy.
Right before all that. But at least people.
The weird thing is, this is supposed to be a white supremacy event, but
I think you identify as a white supremacist.
I identify as a white
supremacist.
But then again, Virginia's governor is a blackface-wearing Democrat, so clearly they've tossed that baby out with the bathwater.
If a guy in blackface standing next to a guy in a hood tells me I need to give up my guns, I think we got a problem, right?
See, for liberals, it is so much easier to just call someone a racist than to actually have a fact-based, logical discussion about firearms, because they would lose. They can't refute the fact that there are currently over 310 million guns in circulation in the United States, and yet less than 0.003% of them have ever been used in a homicide. That's about 1 murder per every 28,000 guns. They can't deny that according to CDC data, you're about 2.5 times more likely to die from a fall, 3 times more likely to die in a car accident, and 4 times more likely to die from the flu than you are of being shot to death. They can't refute the fact that there are an estimated 5 to 10 million AR-15s in the U.S., and yet fewer than 300 people were murdered using a rifle in 2018. That's including all rifles, not just ARs. They can't refute the fact that murders using firearms have dropped by more than 30% in the past 25 years, even as the gun ownership rate has risen by more than 50%. They can't argue with the fact that the vast majority of gun violence in the United States is perpetrated in Democrat-controlled cities with some of the strictest gun control laws in the nation. They can't argue with any of this. Facts are not partisan. They're just facts. And they are not on the left side. So what do they stoop to? Calling people Nazis. See, when they can't win an argument with information, they attack with slander. Never mind that Joe the Hunter just wants to be able to shoot deer and protect his family and be left the heck alone, and you don't have a good argument for taking his AR. Just call him a racist and the media will drool all over it. You want to know why white supremacy is suddenly all over the headlines? It's not because we have any more loser skinheads burning homemade crosses in their grandma's backyard than we did before. It's because the left has become too lazy to craft a better argument. So now everyone that they don't like is a Nazi. Trust me, if Virginia had that many white supremacists, you would know it. At a minimum, 99% of all of today's protesters in Virginia were ordinary people who simply want to defend their constitutional rights, because apparently the words "shall not be infringed" are just too dang complicated for some people to understand. So you can call them racists all you want, and that might make you left, but it sure as heck doesn't make you right. And that's your Reality Check America. Now, if you like this shirt, head on over to the MRC store for this and so much more pro-America stuff. And as always, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube page, like us on Facebook and Twitter, and stay sane out there. U.S. Customs and Immigration Enforcement has issued an immigration detainer for a Guyanese illegal alien accused of raping and murdering a 92-year-old woman in New York City, who he reportedly tackled to the ground, dragged behind a parked car, sexually assaulted, and then left alone in the freezing cold to die. This story brought to you by liberals. So first, the story. Police say 21-year-old Riaz Khan attacked and killed 92-year-old Queens resident Maria Fuertes as she walked near her home in the early morning hours of Monday, January 9th. According to her neighbors, Fuertes was known in her community for her love of cats and her habit of walking in her neighborhood late at night when she would pick up trash and feed stray animals. Now, police also say that Khan left Fuertes lying in the road half naked in 32-degree weather for 2 hours before someone finally found her around 2 a.m. barely clinging to life. She was taken to a local hospital where she was soon pronounced dead. The attack was partially caught by nearby surveillance video, which failed to capture the alleged sexual assault that reportedly took place behind a parked car. Now, adding insult to injury, Khan's reported denial was of the age-old fell down and accidentally raped her variety. He allegedly told investigators that he had found Fuertes lying in the street and had tried to help her, but that he fell down, his belt broke, his pants fell down, and his penis fell near her vagina, according to a prosecutor who spoke at Khan's initial court hearing on Friday. Really kind of takes the whole "he was just trying to put it in her purse" trope to a brand new level. Now, ICE says that Khan should never have even been on the streets in the first place, not only because he was in the country illegally after having overstayed his 2016 tourist visa, but because he had also been picked up in November for assault and weapons charges, stemming from having reportedly attacked his father with a broken ceramic mug, but had been released after New York City officials ignored an ICE detainer thanks to the city's sanctuary city policies. But now that an elderly woman is dead, Khan has been charged with murder, sexual abuse, contact by forcible compulsion, and sexual abuse against a person incapable of consent. He's currently being held without bail at Rikers Island, and if he is convicted, he's looking at 25 years to life. Thank you, taxpayers. And thank you, New York City. Thank you for protecting illegal aliens who knowingly violate our immigration laws. Thank you for releasing dangerous criminals back into our streets to threaten the rest of us who are just trying to peacefully go about our lives. Thank you for putting criminals above law-abiding citizens, for putting little old ladies at risk from people who shouldn't even be here in the first place. Thank you for caring so much more about politics than about the lives of your own people in your own city. And thank you for proving yet again how ridiculous, dangerous, and insane the left's immigration platform truly is, and just how stupid they think we all are. I just wish Maria Fuertes were here so that you could tell her to her face that her life was worth less than votes. And that's your Reality Chick America. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube page, like us on Facebook and Twitter, and stay sane out there.
Demographics are the most important political issue in the West today. The characteristics of a population based on age, sex, income, and race determine the future of a country. Census shows us how various groups think and how they vote. This info is of utmost importance to corporations trying to sell stuff, politicians during elections, and especially for globalists who want to make the West a lefty stronghold. How? Well, it's no secret that the majority of non-white people in the West vote left, and that conservative or nationalist movements are almost entirely made up of people who look like me. It's no secret that mainly white people elected Trump, who will be the last Republican president if immigration trends continue. Because it's also no secret that mass immigration is primarily made up of non-Europeans, legally and illegally. If you import millions of people from the third world into a first world country, who are they going to vote for? The party that promises everything for free with special perks for being a minority, or that party that says we don't see race, work hard, and make your success? We all know the answer. It's why Virginia, like California, is now blue. Virginia's foreign-born population doubled in less than 10 years. The Confederacy is dead, wrote the Washington Compost, celebrating a Democratic coalition that is racially diverse and dominated by women. Because too many straight white men or a white majority is inherently evil and must never exist again anywhere. White Southerners who lived in Virginia for generations are becoming a minority in the towns their ancestors built, seeing a future where their statues will be replaced, streets renamed, and children brainwashed to despise their evil ancestors. European Americans built America not for the entire world, but for themselves in mind. They even limited immigration to certain European countries. We were never asked to vote on the 1965 Hart-Celler Act that began transforming America's demographics. attacks, and versions like it elsewhere in the West. It won't make a big difference, they said. Then yes, it's happening and it's a good thing, too. You deserve it, like a punishment. Our self-determination, culture, and traditions are being attacked and uprooted all around the West. Even if foreigners came and improved our society, like Europeans in Africa, it still doesn't make it right. It's not us. And the same thing will happen in Texas, Georgia, and Florida soon. Latino voters and candidates played an instrumental role in these elections, and they will lobby to get in more of their own so they can gain power. It is a numbers game. It seems everyone knows this except for white conservatives. Mass immigration is a political weapon to ensure that conservative and nationalist, mostly whites, never gain power ever again. With a few exceptions, non-whites in the West do not vote conservative. And why would they when they can vote for a party that gives them racial preferences, government handouts, and encourages their demographic to expand while charging white people for all inequalities? We cannot keep up with the flood of incoming, mostly needy people that never ends. How many is enough? We can't take the weight of the world. It will crush us. We are not supreme, after all. Demographics are destiny, and the current timeline shows a future of third world conditions, chaos, and tribalism like we've never seen before. Not too long ago, when we saw an invasion at the gates, we didn't say, maybe we can change them into one of us and integrate them with our shared values. No, they fought like hell. Let's stop pretending that tribalism and conquest doesn't exist anymore. We don't have elections. We have census. Thank you, Red Ice members, for making what we do possible. We are being banned, censored, and defamed everywhere, so we can't do it without you. Thank you so much for all your support. And if you're not a member, head on over to redicemembers.com and don't miss a thing. We constantly hear superficial reasons as to how mass migrations of people into the West is a good thing and we should welcome it, celebrate it. It's so great that no other people on the planet are doing it. In fact, they call it genocide when mass migrations of people pour into their countries, even when they're genetically not that far off. We're given super convincing reasons why we bad white people must have open borders, like it's humanitarian, because apparently every single human who wants to come live in the West is suffering and will die without us, which is pretty supremacist. And then there's it's what we used to do, immigration built America. So because America was founded by European pioneers, not the same as immigrants, then those descendants can't ever say, no more immigration, that's enough. Oh, and my favorite is that borders in the West are a form of global apartheid where Europeans oppress non-Europeans by not giving them access to our countries. But it's not apartheid when the world keeps Europeans out, of course. Somehow it's our fault that their countries are broken. Lies push to guilt and convince you that open borders will lead to a hipster utopia where racism will finally be eradicated in the West, because racism only exists where white people are. But then on the other hand, we hear how we deserve to be demographically overtaken, deserve to become a minority as a form of punishment because we're such a rotten race. No, we aren't. Top reasons why mass migration and open borders is a bad idea. 1. Violence. No borders means you have no idea who the hell is coming in, and no one would check. Well, because it's profiling people. Criminals, murderers, rapists, terrorists, drug lords, foreign military, spies, all are welcome here. So leave your doors unlocked, racist. 2. No unity, no trust. Massive levels of multiculturalism and multiracialism doesn't work. Importing people with drastically different mindsets and goals, desires, needs, religions, and cultures leads to confusion, frustration, less trust, less social cohesion, which will lead to resentment, racism, and hate. Also, ethnic gangs. Even basic daily interactions become hard, and those little cultural nuances you didn't even realize were important become very important. And don't give me a line about the first generation needs to adjust and melt into the pot. Most terrorists are second and third generation. It only gets worse. I can't stress this enough. Open borders and mass migrations of people is leading to unprecedented conflict. It always has. 3. Poverty. Open borders won't end it. It will make more of it. If the third world can just get access to our magical dirt, then poof, they will share the same work ethic, be educated to become just like us, and be a huge success. If not, blame racism. But when you import poverty, you just get more poverty. The West cannot take on the entire third world. It will become the third world if they do. And the welfare money, it's going to run out. 4. The destruction of native culture, heritage, and tradition. There is no peaceful global melting pot. The entire act is one of surrender and loss. Well, for Europeans it always is. One cultural aspect or heritage will always offend the other. Starkly different people from all over the world means they want to cling onto and celebrate their stuff in your country. They don't really care about what's special to you because they have no connection to it. Eventually, as we've seen in history, they'll push to make their ways honored by everyone, especially if they become a majority. Long term, though, for a globalist, culture and heritage means everyone shopping at the same store. Shared culture in an open borders world becomes all about money, materialism, and consumerism. 5. It's bad for the worker. We all used to know this. We always hear how mass immigration is great for business. Well, it is for mega capitalists who get more shoppers and the flow of constant cheap labor while the American worker suffers. 6. Politics. As we already see, intense forms of tribalism based on racial and ethnic lines are forming. This problem doesn't exist in a homogeneous society. Incoming migrants are extremely tribal, and this will not stop, no matter how much race-mixing propaganda or shit-lived values you try to educate the people with. Instead, eventually, we'll get race-based communism. 7. Environment and overpopulation. Another thing we all used to understand. Elites want 1 billion people in America. Can you imagine that nightmare? 1 billion people? Strain on the infrastructure, draining of resources, water, topsoil, crowding, the cutting down of nature, and of course, more cars, more stuff. It also means a booming, unsustainable population. Kiss your grass-fed organic burgers goodbye. This will lead to an eventual colony collapse. 8. You couldn't enforce laws. Someone could commit a crime and flee across the planet. The only way they could potentially be stopped is by a global police force under global citizen laws. But they'd be too busy chasing thought criminals instead. A global police force is a bad idea. 9. Free movement of people means one nation like Somalia could literally clear out and come to Minnesota or Sweden. That means the country of Somalia would dry up and not exist anymore. But neither would Sweden if they were demographically swamped. It doesn't mean, though, that Swedes would clear out and go to Somalia. But if they did, globalists wouldn't be talking about free movements of people now, would they? No, it only goes in one direction. 10. Globalists want monoculture and a mono-race. They hate true diversity. Their long-term goal is the eradication of all differences and the emergence of a mixed-race man who has no ties to his ancestors, history, or culture. For that guy is easy to manipulate and control. Lastly, America, Europe, Canada, Australia, that country created by Europeans that everyone wants to go to, won't be the same country without the people who built it. It wasn't an idea on a piece of paper that made European nations what they are, but the European mind and soul that made it what it is. Without their influence, without them, it won't exist. And some people are very happy about that. One thing's for sure. This is not being done to us as an act of love. Like what we do? Head over to redicemembers.com and support us. Never miss a thing. We're being blackballed by mega corporations, apps, social media, everything. We are being banned and censored and silenced. So the best way to support us is redicemembers.com. They don't censor us because we're wrong, but because we're right. Thank you all for your support. Love you all.